morning. Welcome to the third day of 2025 AIAA SciTech Forum. I am Mike Hernandez, Senior Engineering Manager of Military Transit Performance and Operability at GE Aerospace. It's been my pleasure to serve this year on the SciTech Guiding Coalition. First and foremost, a big thank you to our AIAA corporate members. Your ongoing financial support, the dedication of your teams, and your role as the foundation of AIAA are what make this organization so impactful and legendary. GE Aerospace is proud to be a part of this community. Corporate membership in AIAA provides incredible opportunities to grow industry presence, invest in workforce development, engage in advocacy and industry presence, invest in workforce development, engage in advocacy, and foster meaningful collaboration. It's exciting to see so many of our nearly 100 corporate members here this week as speakers, sponsors, and exhibitors. One of the highlights of the SciTech Forum is when we recognize our newest AIAA Associate Fellows. This distinguished group of professionals has been selected by their peers for their significant and lasting contributions to the aerospace profession. They exemplify expertise, passion, and dedication to advancing their specific disciplines, and they are truly shaping the future of aerospace. Tonight, we will celebrate them during the dinner and induction ceremony. I'd like to ask the class of 2025 AIAA Associate Fellows to stand now and be recognized by your peers and colleagues. Before we get to some of the schedule highlights, please note that we have a photo opportunity right after this session. All NASA employees are encouraged to gather at 9:05 for a One NASA photo. We'll meet in front of Regency Ballroom R and S. Those of you who aren't NASA employees but are interested in working for NASA, you know where to find them. Turning now to our schedule. Today we have two great ways to connect with your fellow attendees. At 11:30 a.m., we'll have lunch in the Expo Hall. Seating is available here in the Windermere Ballroom. We encourage you to make new connections and sit with attendees from your region. And at 3:30, join us for the Idea Challenge workshop here in the Windermere Ballroom. You and fellow attendees will brainstorm the next generation of DARPA hard problems. This is an opportunity for all attendees to participate and share their thoughts. Turning now to our program. We'll kick off this morning with a keynote address from Dr. Bronson Messer II, Distinguished Staff Scientist and Director of Science for the Oak Ridge Leadership Computing Facility, Oak Ridge National Laboratory. As Director of Science, his primary job is to ensure that the resources provided through the OLCF's allocation programs are effectively used to produce high-impact science and to communicate those impacts to all stakeholders, including the public. Bronson is also a joint faculty professor in the Department of Physics and Astronomy at the University of Tennessee. His primary research interests are related to the explosion mechanisms and phenomenology of supernovae, especially neutrino transport and signatures, dense matter physics, and the details of turbulent nuclear combustion. In addition, he has worked on the application of machine learning algorithms to the analysis of galaxy merger simulations and on performance modeling and prediction for high-performance computing architectures. In 2020, Bronson was awarded the Department of Energy Secretary's Honor Award for his part in enabling the COVID-19 High-Performance Computing Consortium. He holds undergraduate and graduate degrees from the University of Tennessee, earning his PhD in physics in 2000. Today, he'll tell us about the world's first exascale supercomputer, Frontier. He will describe features of Frontier's architecture that make it especially useful for many types of scientific computing. He will take a look at some of the most impactful aerospace results that have been enabled via the increased capability of Frontier. GE Aerospace is excited to work with ORNL and Frontier to conduct turbulence modeling and to study ways to negate its effects on commercial flights. When he has finished his remarks, I will join him on stage, and Bronson will take questions from our audience. Please use the QR code on the screen to enter or upvote a question. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Bronson Messer to the stage.
Mike, thanks very, very much. I'm overjoyed to be here this morning. I'm hoping I'm going to fake it well enough. Everybody will quickly learn that I'm not an engineer by training. As Mike said, I'm an astrophysicist. But I live in your community a lot, and I think we have some shared interests that I think will be manifest throughout what I tell you. You're going to see this image a lot in my talk. It's what Frontier looks like, the world's first exascale supercomputer, and I'll try to detail that quantitatively to give you an idea of what it actually means. Just an outline of what I'm going to talk about. Mike already referred to this. What is the Leadership Computing Facility? It's a very particular kind of thing, and it's that particularity that I'm going to also try to outline to you because it sort of sets the stage for exactly how we do science and engineering on the machine. I'll try to convince you that Frontier is a unique scientific instrument. It's not just another cluster in a lot of ways, and it's certainly, I always say that Frontier has more in common with the Hubble Space Telescope or the Large Hadron Collider than it has with your laptop. It is a unique resource to actually do science and engineering with. And I'll try to motivate that and a handful of examples and other things to you. To do that, I'm going to look at a handful of recent scientific results and how to take advantage of the machine in particular. And then I want to talk a little bit about how we can increase capability into the future. And the real reason behind that is that waiting for Moore's Law to do miracles has never been a plan. It's actually really not a plan anymore. I personally have heard throughout my career that Moore's Law is dead. It's finally actually true. This sort of doubling of performance that we're going to get every 18 months has hit the end of the road for a variety of reasons. Some of them economic, some of them practical, some of them right down to the physics of what happens on microelectronics. And so we have to think about how we're going to reformulate problems and actually solve them in a much different way. And then, as Mike said, I'm going to be delighted to take questions. The Oak Ridge Leadership Computing Facility is a computing facility at Oak Ridge National Laboratory. We're not too far up 75 from here in Orlando. I think we could get there in about 9 hours if we drove. There's a reason Oak Ridge was put in the hills of East Tennessee back right around World War II, and it becomes readily apparent if you're ever at the laboratory. There's no railroad there. You're really not really near a navigable waterway. There were no humans there. There's a reason we're in this little cove in East Tennessee. Our mission is straightforward. It's to deploy and operate computational and data resources required to tackle global challenges. And those global challenges span a panoply of different particular fields. Importantly, we're one of DOE's Office of Science computational user facilities. So there's OLCF at Oak Ridge National Laboratory, there's ALCF, and I'll tell you a little bit more about our close partnership with Argonne at Argonne National Laboratory outside Chicago, and then the National Energy Research Scientific Computing Center at Berkeley Lab, just above Berkeley's campus there in the East Bay. Importantly, what you may have heard about lots of people in this room may have had collaborators or actually worked directly on big machines that might be at Livermore National Laboratory or Los Alamos National Laboratory, Sandia National Laboratory. Those machines are run by our cousins in the National Nuclear Safety Administration. The DOE's Office of Science has a completely separate sort of set of supercomputers and a very different regime and attitude towards being able to make them available for general scientific purposes. And I'll talk a little bit more about that as we go as well. So again, I'm coming back to this statement about what a leadership computing facility actually is. Well, we always have to be careful when we talk about the leadership computing facility, in as much as the facility is a single facility, but it actually spans 2 sites. There's a site at Oak Ridge and a site at Argonne. We do a lot of things together, and we are friendly competitors in many other ways. We're mostly collaborators for the most part. Our mission is to provide an ecosystem that enables capability computing to really thrive and grow to sizes that are typically let's say, 2 orders of magnitude larger than what you typically can get at any other facility on the face of the planet, whether that facility be at a university, another national laboratory, or in a private organization. We administer ourselves 2 highly competitive user allocation programs. The second one there, I've actually put these in a little bit the wrong order. The second one, the Oscar Leadership Computing Challenge, ASCR is the Advanced Scientific Computing Research part of the Office of Science, is for the most part dedicated to DOE Office of Science mission science. There's occasionally an ALCC allocation in there that has to do with other things, but for the most part, the ALCC program is sort of dedicated to mission science for the Office of Science, which mostly means biological and environmental research, basic energy sciences like material science and computational chemistry, fusion energy sciences, high energy physics, and nuclear physics. Again, there's a little bit of variety, but for the most part, ALCC is dedicated to that. That's 30% of all our cycles in a year. 60% of all our cycles in a year is dedicated to that first program, Insight. Insight is open to anyone on the face of the earth. Foreign, domestic, private, university researchers, laboratory researchers, anybody can apply for an Insight allocation. There's a reason for that I'll get to in the next slide, why we make the aperture as wide as we do for Insight. There, of course, is no free lunch, I'll tell you that. Like any program that has finite resources being dispersed to several people, there is a scientific review of the proposals. Along with that scientific review, we also do a technical assessment of each one of the proposals. And the reason for that is not to disqualify somebody, but we want to make sure that you not only can make use of computational resources at the scale of Frontier, but that you need to do so to carry out your science. And I'll refer to this later as well, because if you really don't need to, it might not be the most pleasant experience in your life to try to use the very largest machine on the face of the planet. But if you really need it, there's no substitute. So the LCF, I think this is true, it's pretty unique in as much as our existence can be directly traced back to a single public law, the Department of Energy High-End Computing Revitalization Act of 2004. There's specific language in that law that births the LCF and gives us our mission statement in a big way. And that is the text you see here. The Secretary of Energy, acting through the Office of Science, shall establish and operate the leadership systems facilities and provide access on a competitive merit review basis to researchers in U.S. industry, institutions of higher learning, national laboratories, and other federal agencies. And moreover, there's additional text in that law that says that we should be providing 10 to 100 times more computational power than is available anywhere else. Our mission is clear. I never have to tell one of our new employees something nebulous. Our purpose is very straightforward. We've been around since this law was passed back in 2004. Our first machine that we ever fielded was the last big vector supercomputer that was ever built by Cray Incorporated, the Cray X1E. Sorry, you guys are going to have to indulge me. Who ran on an old Cray vector supercomputer in the room? Warms the cockles of my cockles to see so many hands go up. I still have a node board from Eagle, that X1E, in my office. I always say that it was one of the 2 best computers I ever ran on. And I classify best as being better than anything else that was available at the time. It was a wonderful computer. We've gone through multiple generations of new machines in the intervening 20 years. Our latest machine is the world's first exaflop supercomputer of Frontier. Frontier has a peak speed of 2.1 exaflops in double precision. I realize that there's a lot of folks with differing backgrounds. Again, when I usually interface with your community, I'm used to talking to some really, really talented gearheads, so I'll try to bring that back just a little bit. An exaflop, what the heck does that mean? Well, I trust that most of the audience knows their metric prefixes. Exa is not one you get to use a lot. It's 10 to the 18, so it's a quintillion. And a flop is a floating point operation per second. And there is a lot of vagaries associated with this, but basically it means a number with a decimal point in it, another number with a decimal point in it, add or multiply them together, get the result out. Our own wetware, if you will, sort of runs at a flop, one of those operations per second. Frontier's peak speed is 2.1 exaflops in double precision, so 16 places after the decimal point, which is essential for a lot of scientific computing, although more and more we see trends towards lower precision computing, and we're probably going to have to come to terms with that in some sense, how to recover the precision that might be needed for certain kinds of applications in the context of that kind of hardware. Somebody asked me earlier, is it just a big cluster? Yeah, at 0th order, it is just a big cluster. There's 9,856 nodes in the machine. That's 77 compute racks. I'm going to try to give you a sense of physically what the machine looks like and how big it is. But each one of those racks, those double-doored racks that you see there, I always liken it in size to a commercial refrigerator. That's sort of what, you could almost put your arms around the whole front of the machine. It's sort of 8 feet tall. If you're relatively tall like me, you can sort of touch the top. That's sort of it. There's 128 nodes per rack. One of those racks is equivalent to the computational power of our penultimate machine. So the machine that we fielded between 2012 and 2015 had a peak speed that is now encapsulated in a single one of those cabinets. Each one of the nodes inside those cabinets is a single AMD CPU surrounded by 4 AMD GPUs. The special sauce that makes this a supercomputer, as opposed to something that you might see provided by a hyperscaler like Microsoft Azure or Google Cloud, is that interconnect, that thing in the bottom corner there. The slingshot Ethernet with a 3-hop Dragonfly topology, the ability to shuffle data between nodes really, really fast and with low latency and large bandwidth. We spent a lot of money on that part of the machine for good reason. And I think anybody who's a practitioner will understand exactly why, right? You need to be able to do domain decomposition, chop your problem into smaller and smaller bits, be able to do a lot of individual flops in each part of that domain, and then reintegrate the various pieces together all at once. The storage is pretty prodigious as well. Unformatted, there's about an exabyte of storage in our center-wide file system. That file system looks like one big disk drive. If you're sitting on the machine and you type ls, and I know I'm already slipping into technical jargon, but if you take a look at what's in the directory, it looks like there's one big disk drive on the machine that has 700 gigabytes of capacity, 700 petabytes of capacity just sitting there waiting for you to write to it. In addition, each one of the individual nodes has a 3.8 terabyte flash drive, essentially, attached to it. And people have made pretty effective use of that node local storage to do things like store large tables of data that they might not need during every time step of a simulation, for example, to be able to hold data that they want to be able to use in training an AI model of some sort, and or to just make the I/O go faster, to be able to write faster and more data to that big file system as well. All right. A few more glamour shots of the machine, just to give you, again, a sense of scale. You can see one of the cabinets open in this figure here. Those red and blue hoses are doing exactly what you think. The blue is cold water, the red is the hot water coming off. We'll talk about exactly what I mean by hot and cold in just a second when we look at the node architecture just a little bit more. But everybody always asks, why are they red and why are they blue? Well, they're literally there to remind you the hot water's coming off on the red hoses, the cold water's coming in on the blue hose side. One more glamour shot to give you to give you a sense of human scale. Again, each one of those cabinets is sort of the size of a commercial refrigerator. You can sort of see the back edge of the machine in this fisheye lens picture as well. So you could walk around the machine, if you will, at a nice, safe pace. We want to make sure everybody's safe in our machine room, but at a nice, safe pace, you could sort of do it in a minute and a half, pretty straightforwardly. So that gives you a sense of scale for the machine. One more sort of speeds and feeds slide for the machine so we can talk about a couple of very particular things. Those racks, I told you sort of how big they are volume-wise, right? But I didn't mention anything about the total mass. They're 8,000 pounds apiece. Part of that is they hold a lot of water. But I always tell people 8,000 pounds is ridiculous. In East Tennessee units, that's 2 F-150s. And we literally had to rip the floor out of our machine room, completely rebuild it, and reinforce it so that we could actually put racks of that weight in the machine room when we actually got the machine. The other thing is, my guess is a lot of folks in the audience are gearheads like me. You've been to plenty of data centers. You've walked in, and you're sort of struck by a couple of things viscerally when you walk into a big machine room, it seems to me. And I always ask people, what adjectives do you think of when you think about a big machine room or a data center? And I'm hoping that people are mouthing the answer right now, but they typically go, it's cold. Can I get some nods? Thank you. And it's loud, right? There's a lot of noise. If you were to walk into our data center, the ambient temperature is 72 degrees, and we could have a conversation standing 10 feet apart from one another, no problem. And the reason for that is that liquid cooling. Those hoses I've already referred to, that weight, everything on this machine is liquid cooled. We do not rely on air to transport heat flux out of this machine anywhere, all the way down to the network interface cards. They're liquid cooled. That's a remarkable thing. What that's allowed us to do is to have this metric called a PUE, a power utilization efficiency, which can be measured for a lot of machine rooms. If you're Microsoft Azure and you stand up one of these nice new data centers and you have a PUE of, let's say, 1.5, which would mean 50% of the total joule heating losses sort of go into the air, right? Or if down to 1.3, so a third of them go into the air, you're pretty pleased, right? You're only wasting about half to a third of the power of the energy that you're actually pumping into the machine. The PUE for our data center is 1.03, and it mostly has to do with that liquid cooling that we use. Also, I told you that the blue and red hoses are hot water and cold water. That's true. The cold water, however, the cold water side is 92 degrees Fahrenheit. Comes out at about 140. It's great talking to an audience like this because everybody's taken thermodynamics and everybody knows that delta T is what really matters. That's how we get the energy out. 92 degree Fahrenheit water is great because I don't have to buy a chiller to be able to get it down to temperature. I can just use evaporative cooling out the back. Even on a nice, warm, 92-degree day in East Tennessee with high humidity, I can still do it. But 92-degree water also presents other challenges, and I can tell you that I've seen some pretty gross stuff come out of these racks at various points until we kind of figured out exactly the balance of the biocide that we needed to be able to control the machine. All right. So I just had a ball just spewing out hyperbolic numbers to you guys. I hope you had the same kind of ball. Let's talk a little bit about what we actually use the machine for. So what do we actually do with all that computing power, memory, and storage? I find this really important, and it's one of the things that makes my job so cool. We literally do everything. We talked about the National Laboratory System. The National Laboratory System, to zeroth order, is a collection of user facilities. It's a collection of big machines used to do science and engineering. Each one of those machines tends to have a particular niche, a particular community that it's serving. Our colleagues at Oak Ridge who live up on the ridge at the spallation neutron source, they make a lot of noise about the fact that the SNS can be used for an incredible panoply of scientific results. It can do everything from material science to biology and sort of everything in between, and they're 100% right. They can't touch us when it comes to the Catholic purview of what we're able to do with a supercomputer. There's no field of science and engineering that isn't directly touched by supercomputing in some way. That said, at the exascale especially, there are some prime candidates for what we can actually do to contribute to knowledge generation. And those are things like problems that require the resolution of a vast scale of space or time. Things where a lot of physics is going on at every spatial point, for example, in combustion chemistry or radiation transport. And problems where we need to perform many high-fidelity simulations to understand how things change with input parameters. Does that sound like problems that anybody in the room is familiar with? Just for instance? I would think so, that especially this audience, this kind of problem set is something that would resonate. Even with all that, I get asked this question quite a bit. It's been asked by lots of different folks in lots of different roles. Is there a killer app for exascale computing? So I'll admit, I hate the question, again, because it sort of puts an immediate lie to what I just said, that it's good for everything. But people ask it. So I thought about it quite a bit, as a matter of fact. And what I came up with is there's probably not a killer app. I'm going to say no. But there is this ubiquitous physical problem that requires a lot of memory because I need to get resolution. It needs faster compute speed, and it gets included in other simulations of natural phenomena all over the place. And I hope that everybody in this room has already figured this out. I usually have to lead people by the nose to this result, but I'm guessing that there's people who are already mouthing the answer here. Turbulence may well be the killer app for exascale computing. For folks who aren't familiar, and again, it's great to talk to this audience because most people are familiar, turbulence is the last great unsolved problem in classical physics. There's no way in heck that Werner Heisenberg actually said, when I meet God, I'm going to ask him two questions, why relativity and why turbulence, and I really believe he'll have an answer for the first. But man, it's a great quote, isn't it? When I was a postdoc, I worked with Leo Katanov at the University of Chicago, and one time he told me, Bronson, if anybody ever tells you that they understand turbulence, put one hand on your wallet and back slowly out of the room, because they're trying to sell you something. Now, we remain really far away from being able to resolve the turbulent cascade from the very largest scales on which it's actually generated all the way to the molecular dissipation scale. But for a lot of problems, we don't have to do that. There's other physics that comes into play that arrests the cascade at a place where it's useful to still understand what's going on. And those are the kind of problems that I think I want to talk to you a little bit more about. One of the first problems that was attacked with Frontier, way back when the machine was rickety, was making gross brown-looking stuff because we hadn't quite got the mix of that nice warm water quite right, was going up and down. We were still trying to format the file system. Nevertheless, a team from GE Aerospace jumped on the machine and did one of the largest turbulence simulations ever attempted. It was an absolute joy working with this team. I think everybody also in this audience has the experience when you work with folks who are really good practitioners and they sort of immediately grok what you're talking about, it's a joy. This team, Stefan Preby's team from GE Research, simply took the machine, started the simulation, and just got on with it. Machine went down 4 times a day, no problem. Write a restart file, we'll pick it up, we'll keep it going. Month after month after month to be able to look at this particular problem for this open fan design that GE Aerospace has come up with. When this project started, I didn't know, although I've learned since, that this sort of open fan design has sort of been known for a long, long time, most of my life, to be much more efficient. Take a large volume of air and move it slowly across a jet engine instead of using a nacelle, for example, to increase the velocity. But aeroacoustic noise, of course, is one of the big things that makes that hard to actually put into practice in an engineering sense. Understanding the formation of the turbulent eddies, how they evolve, and how they interact with the rest of an airframe, though, can be used to figure out what you can do to ameliorate that. I know that the team's already been through multiple instantiations of the shape of these fan blades and the stators, and they've been able to do that because they have a rich data set of turbulence simulations that they've actually done on the machine. You see an example here. That's led to us signing a cooperative research agreement with GE Aerospace. In the past year, this was announced at the Farnborough Air Show in the middle of last year. This cooperative agreement, for the most part, is an ability for us to learn more about the problem at the National Laboratory and to contribute our expertise in things like solver technology, computer science, ranging all over the ecosystem. And I'll talk a little bit about that as well. About ranging up and down the ecosystem, and any other expertise that we can bring to bear on the problem going forward. Part and parcel to that, and sort of tied up in that, is another project on the machine from Boeing, where and again, a lot of people in this audience know this better than I do, emissions and noise are especially impactful in high lift, low airspeed takeoff and landing. Same sort of problem setting as for that open fan design. A very large project led by Adam Clark at Boeing, focused on grid requirements for these high lift situations to resolve challenging flow physics associated with low speed flows, where the corners that you usually go and hide in to be able to use approximations effectively aren't available to you anymore. The next step might well be to affix that open fan design on this sort of airframe and see if you can actually build a plane. That Insight project is actually going forward as of last week as well. Another participant in that particular Insight project on Frontier is it's a little too fast. Is Eric Nielsen's team at NASA. Eric's been a long-time user of the OLCF, mostly to look at a problem of retropropulsion for landing humans and a lot of stuff on the surface of Mars. I think it won't come to a surprise to anybody that if you're actually going to pack enough stuff and enough people to do a long-term mission to Mars, you're not going to be able to use a parachute to get stuff down to the ground. You actually need to use retropropulsion. But steady flight in the Martian atmosphere depends on understanding induced turbulence in that atmosphere. They've been able, in just the past few months, to be able to do a virtual closed-loop full test of rolling and pitching into the Martian atmosphere using this design for the retropropulsion rockets. Without the power of Frontier, that simply would not have been possible. You know, these are all very large sort of LES or RANS simulations, but you might not be surprised that maybe our real forte is in direct numerical simulation. There's also a lot of big DNS problems that are being run on the machine. One of them is this team led by Richard Sandberg at the University of Melbourne in Australia. And again, we're open to the whole world. And it was looking at roughness, in this case actually induced by wear on turbomachinery blades. Each one of these simulations used 1,000 nodes per simulation and a total allocation of about 600,000 node hours. Again, 1,000 nodes on Frontier is hundreds of petaflops of computational power. It easily dwarfs, say, 2 or 3 very, very large university computing centers, and it's only 10% of the machine. We actually penalize Richard and his team time-wise because the problem isn't quite big enough. And I'll talk about that just a little bit later as well. The ability to do this and to check the Reynolds analogy, I think was an important step. Okay, what else does the exascale bring to science other than just big swing the hammer and make stuff work? It's of course discipline specific, but there's three big impacts. We're going to free people from the tyranny of some approximations. We're going to be able to do more physics everywhere in the domain. And we're going to be able to do larger physical domains, which seems a little hokey if you just say it out loud, but think about it just a little bit. The best analogy actually is not an aerospace analogy in my mind. It's the design of a tokamak, right? People have been doing particle and cell plasma simulations for tokamaks for decades and decades and decades. That's great. Understanding the induced turbulence in a fusion plasma is important. But what really matters is I want to actually build a tokamak. So I need to understand the materials physics that's going on in the blanket on the interior of the tokamak. I need to understand how plasma might be induced as I pass the pedestal that's holding the tokamak up. Growing the physical domain is sometimes important to understand the physics that's actually going on, and it's essential to be able to understand how to actually build the machine. And I think that's something that's being attacked, for example, in this biennial propulsion aerodynamics workshop sponsored by AIAA. OLCF has committed to 50,000 node hours to this particular workshop and being able to offer time for the part of the problem that's impactful for us. Mostly the use of GPU accelerated solvers to be able to attack this as well. You see the project leads, including Neil DeMel, who gave me this slide, from Lockheed Martin. This propulsion aerodynamics workshop, the RISE work that I mentioned earlier, my understanding is they all sort of lead into this a vision that was promulgated in this NASA report, the CFD Vision 2030 study. When I first saw this, what I call a aspirational Gantt chart, I was a little put off by it. But then I started reading it over and over again. And the more I read it, the more I liked it. It's actually got a ton of great insight in it. If you start from the bottom, this notion that I/O and knowledge extraction, actually being able to do visualization and data analysis, is the most important thing. And therefore, you better make sure that you pay close attention to it as data volumes and compute cycles grow as you go forward, is an amazing insight in my opinion, and one that other communities would do well to learn from all of you and your colleagues. If you keep going up, I'm fascinated that the technical readiness level for mesh generation, including adaptive mesh generation, is sort of marked green here. No problem. We'll get there. We got it. Right? No, I can tell you in stellar astrophysics, we sweat adaptive mesh refinement a lot. I would never have the temerity to put the technical readiness level at green as we approach multi-exascale computing, but I actually believe you guys in some sense. Working my way up, I was struck by the fact that you also are a little less or a little more trepidatious about the inclusion of combustion chemistry and multiphysics in there. And I thought, well, for example, my own work on supernovae, we sort of solved that problem. We just throw all those ODEs on the GPU and we got it. And we have much stiffer systems. Fastest rate to slowest rates, 20 orders of magnitude. I was like, why are these guys so worried about it? Then I realized it's because we are trivially premixed for nuclear combustion. Not the same problem in a lot of ways. And it interacts with scales all up and down this aspirational Gantt chart as I talked about. I will provide one little piece of warning. And that is, if you look in the top right corner of this chart, you'll see that the sort of the flag in the ground is 30 exaflops. It's going to be a while before we get to 30 exaflops. And it's almost undoubtedly not going to be in 2030. Again, that's mostly because of the death of Moore's Law, a lot of infrastructure challenges, a lot of economic challenges. We'll probably get to a fraction of that, more computational power than we have now, but only factors of maybe 2, 3, something like that, and then very near future. It's going to really take new insight. And that's the last thing I wanted to mention as far as doing work on an exascale machine. I was surprised when we went to the exascale. I'll fully admit that I thought moving to the exascale was just going to be almost a symbolic sort of hurdle that we would surpass. That, okay, fine, we'll have a machine that's 10 times faster than our last machine, no big deal. It has been a big deal, it turns out. It has really enabled new simulations that are really, really important, and things that are different. These new demands stem from this list of things that I have written down here, and then in red I've sort of marked the qualities of a new machine that are going to help push those things forward. And I think there are examples that are important to this community found throughout this list. Engineering turbulent flows, design of experiments to be able to reduce the initial set of situations that you want to investigate. The use of subgrid models. We're going to continue to use subgrid models in a variety of ways, and coupling to multiphysics. We need increases in capability beyond the pure speed of the machine to be able to realize a lot of this. Okay, so with that, I just want to reiterate once again, and in a very concrete way, that we really are sort of open to the whole world. And we're especially interested in learning from and working with folks in this community. I gave you an accountancy of the cycles that we have on the machine every year, 30% to ALCC, 60% to Insight. You'll notice that there's 10% left over. That all goes in our director's discretionary account that I have the discretion to distribute. We allocate node hours. A typical DD award is 15,000 to 20,000 node hours. We accept proposals to the DD program on a continuing rolling basis, and we typically award DDs for a year. The URL is literally here. I should have put a QR code so everybody could take a picture, but we're fairly easy to find. OLCF DD will probably get you there on Google. We have a set of expectations and aims for our DD program that you see listed here. What this boils down to is something I referred to earlier. Because we are enjoined, if you will, by our mission statement to support the very largest capability runs that are possible. If you don't do capability computing, computing on frontier can be an unpleasant experience. You can sit in the queue for way too long if you've got a dozen node job that you want to run. It just won't be very fun. And there's a reason for that. And the reason is we're playing this huge glorified game of Tetris all the time. I'm trying to figure out where to stick these big jobs into the queue to let them all run together. But the jobs that are really important to us and that we have to make sure that we run are the big blocks. And there's no room left to sort of fill in the chinks between. And therefore, non-capability jobs sort of suffer from starvation in the queue in a lot of ways. But that said, if you have aspirations, plans, whatever, if you think you want to try to get to really, really large-scale computing, we would love to talk to you. The other part of what we do is we do bespoke solutions. We have dozens of projects every year, not hundreds. That allows us to actually scale human expertise and human involvement in a very, very real way to help individuals. This is what the proposal form looks like. Here's some usual demographic information that you might want to have to be able to do that. And with that, I'm overjoyed to be able to take questions. Thank you very, very much for being here this morning.
Okay, Bronson will now take some questions. Please use the QR code and submit your questions and upvote. Okay. Bronson, first question here, it's getting a lot of attention. How will quantum computing affect the work your team does?
That's a really good question. So I have to say that I'm a quantum advocate. I think quantum computing really has the ability to impact a lot of different fields. Here, my suspicion is that over the next decade or so, quantum computing will make the biggest impact on what I would call quantum problems. Problems where I'm going to actually solve a coupled quantum system. For my own work, that would be something like what's the impact of neutrino flavor oscillations, or abilities to do better computational chemistry, which may have impact on things like aerospace. We do have a small team at Oak Ridge who's looking at doing incompressible hydrodynamics using quantum computing as well. Yeah, I think a lot of this audience also would understand that that boils down to a big matrix problem, like a lot of quantum mechanics does. But I think the ability to do that on a very, very large scale is probably a ways off. If I were a student, I think I'd be very, very interested in getting into this field with the realization that maybe it would take my whole career to get what I wanted. But that's okay. That's not a bad way to set up a scientific career, if you will.
That's right. All right, thank you, Bronson. Another one, why choose AMD over Intel or NVIDIA for CPUs and GPUs?
That's a really good question. So a variety of considerations. At the time that we chose AMD, we were very, very concerned with making sure that we had variety of chips and therefore software ecosystems across the leadership computing facility. And our colleagues at Argonne had already chosen Intel. So we were sort of stopped from picking Intel. So then it came down to NVIDIA versus AMD. And to be honest, we just got a flat better deal from AMD at the time. We got more compute power for the same amount of money. And that was one of the main motivating reasons. I think that AMD was an up-and-comer and remains an up-and-comer versus NVIDIA, I think. I think that's something that AMD is starting to learn, that our past association with NVIDIA sort of taught us and taught NVIDIA, was that the most important thing was the software. And I don't think anybody in this audience who's a practitioner would disagree with that either. We learned that on Titan, the machine before Summit, which is the machine before Frontier. We worked closely with NVIDIA, actually building their software stack, refining their software stack, and we're doing the same sort of thing with AMD today. We just finished an RFP for the next machine after Frontier. I can tell you that it'll be called Discovery. But we don't know yet whether or not it'll be an AMD machine, an NVIDIA machine, or something completely different.
Yeah, okay. Thank you, Bronson. What is the limiting component for Frontier? Interconnectivity speed, CPU, GPU speed, or something else?
That's a really good question. It totally depends on the problem. So if you're doing a big elliptic solve on the machine, it's going to be the interconnect. It's going to be the thing that limits you. There are lots of calculations that don't require a ton of bandwidth but need low latency. There are a lot of computations where the stencil size is fairly low, and you need to be able to do that with a big node, a big fat node with a lot of speed as well. I'm jealous of those simulations where you're able to not worry about the interconnect so much and just do the domain decomposition and just almost trivially parallelize it. So I'd say there's no simple answer to that question. It's an excellent question, and it's one that every practitioner should ask, but it's very application specific. I'll reiterate what I said earlier, which is that one of the things that is often sort of left on the table if you do simulations on big cloud resources is that network. There's really good reasons for the cloud providers not to invest a lot in the interconnect because nobody's going to use it at that scale typically. We take the opposite approach to try to make a big integrated thing that can really handle capability jobs.
All right. Here's shifting gears a little bit. How do you protect this facility from cyber criminals?
We have a cyber team that's a dozen people and a lot of built-up walls. We are a prime target for script kiddies. I think the last thing I heard is somebody knocks on our virtual door once every 7 seconds. So we're pretty much under constant attack. One of the ways that we also operate in what's called a moderate security posture, so that we don't do anything classified. That's something that I talked about briefly about NNSA being different from the Office of Science. We don't do any nuclear weapons research. We don't do anything that's classified. We do, however, do ITAR protected work. We, in some cases, do HIPAA protected work. Those require additional cybersecurity measures. But our biggest cybersecurity measure is, and we've been doing this long before it was cool, is one-time passwords. And then we basically vet every user as if they're going to be on site and ask them to do things a certain way. What that means is, again, back to this notion, if you're using a resource that is really powerful, maybe it's not the simplest thing to do, is it's kind of hard sometimes to get data in, especially in a streaming sense, into the center, because you have to punch all the way into this moderate security enclave that we have. We're looking for ways to be able to get around that, not to get around it, but to ameliorate the effect of it. But it's a hard nut to crack if we actually want to keep the perimeter safe at the same time.
Sure. Okay. Fantastic. Thank you. How much power does it take to operate Frontier, including cooling?
Oh, including cooling. So that's actually a harder question than you might think. But I can quote you some wonderfully hyperbolic numbers. Into the facility, we have 40 megawatts total power coming into the facility, which is prodigious. I mean, that's, I did the calculation. I grew up in a very, very small town in the mountains of North Carolina. It's 40 of my hometowns, even today. So that's into a building. And if you ever come to Oak Ridge, it gets even worse, because what we've done is we've taken a 3-story sort of sedate suburban office building and we've turned it into a cyberpunk monstrosity. We've punched holes in the wall for cooling and for power all over the place. It just sort of looks, it's kind of cool looking in one sense and it's kind of ridiculous looking in another. But we're doing the best we can with what we have. The machine at full flight, and actually the code that runs it the hardest is not high-performance LINPACK, which is the benchmark you use to submit your value for the top 500 supercomputers in the world. It's actually a gas dynamics code used for active galaxy simulations called CHOYA from the University of Pittsburgh. When CHOYA is running, it draws just south of 25 megawatts of power, and it makes the lights in my office flicker. I can imagine that I can almost see time steps going by.
Wow.
I went and asked the infrastructure guys, and they actually kind of assure me that no, that's not it. And I'm not, but they're almost exactly 2 seconds long. I mean, that's how long a time step would be. And they go, no, shut up, and tell me to go back to my office. So yeah, 25 megawatts at the outside. I think most jobs live in this sweet spot between, say, 12 megawatts and 18 megawatts. But that's still a prodigious amount of power.
Absolutely. This goes to the director question. Is Frontier open to international institutes or companies?
It absolutely is. It's, you can SSH to the machine just by typing SSH Frontier, your username at frontier.olcf.org.gov. And we are open to foreign entities. We do have constraints with respect to sensitive countries, places like Iran or China. Although we have had investigators from China on the machine before. It just takes a while for us to get the clearance to let them on. But there are some countries that we're stopped from actually doing. But in an average year for Insight, 10 to 15% of all of the allocations are to foreign entities, either commercial universities or other research institutes in foreign countries. And another 10 to 15% are US industry, for example. And then in the DD program, the numbers are probably roughly the same, sort of 10 to 15%.
Okay, all right. This will be our last question. What is the most exciting new technical development across the national labs that you expect in the next 2 to 5 years?
Oh, my goodness, well, that's an interesting question. I'll say this, when it comes to computing per se, this realization that Moore's Law really is, goodness gracious, dead, has been realized by the Office of Science in particular. And Oscar has recently launched a microelectronics initiative. So the ability to be able to contribute the expertise that we have in the National Laboratory System and the rest of the federally funded ecosystem to be able to solve the problem of getting microelectronics sort of up to speed, be able to formulate ways to produce microelectronics without having to send everything to TSMC, and to build new architectures around microelectronic ideas, I think that's going to bear the most fruit. What they actually come up with, I've got no idea, which is both a scary and an exciting proposition. But I am sure that something will come out of that work, because it's the first time in a long time that we've actually paid particular attention to that.
All right, fantastic. Well, Bronson, thank you so much for your participation today. And appreciation of that, we want to present you with this AIAA Challenge coin.
Great. Terrific.
All right.
Thanks very much.
Thank you, Bronson.